Beloved, we are gathered here today because of this comment right here from World Nerd G. So after the video yesterday talking about the crisis, well, the potential crisis ahead, and all of the things that are conspiring to bring around this crisis, he's obviously looking for a comparison between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak over the last month or so, a little over a month. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. So just for the record, I'm going to be using bond yields and I'm going to be using the pound as the measurement here. But I think before we actually get stuck in, it's probably worthwhile just maybe recapping and going back over the situation that we face and the challenges and where we found ourselves. But going back to the leadership contest between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, because I think the context there is also really, really important. So I'm going to roll this clip, and many of you may actually remember this if you were paying attention to the leadership contest back then.
The most pressing economic priority for the new Prime Minister and the new government is to grip inflation. We cannot make it worse. Inflation is the enemy that makes everybody poorer. It erodes your savings. It erodes your living standards. It means that those of you that have mortgages will see your interest rates go up higher and higher. So I don't think the responsible thing to do right now is launch into some unfunded spree of borrowing and more debt. That will just make inflation worse. It will make the problem longer.
Let's be clear. We have inflation because of our monetary policy, that we haven't been tough enough on the monetary supply. That's the way I would address that issue.
Okay.
But it is wrong.
Interest rates up, mortgages nightmare.
It is.
Liz, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan, it's a fairy tale.
I think it is wrong to put taxes up because that is what we're talking about.
All right. So if you remember that little exchange in the leadership debate, this is back in, I think it's in July now. Feels like a very, very long time ago. There were some really important points made there. And, Rishi talking about the fact that inflation is the killer. Inflation has been the driving force behind our interest rates increasing through the bulk of this year. And it's the reason why interest rates on mortgages have gone up. It's the reason why rents are starting to go up. It is been the catalyst for a lot of financial hardship for a lot of people, that combined with energy prices. So some of the stuff that he was talking about there was spot on. However, the narrative, and Liz did, to be in a defense, mention something that is actually quite right. If you have a lot of money flooding into the system and you have low interest rates, that means more money goes into the system, which can actually impact inflation. However, her plans specifically were never going to be something that would help in the situation where you're trying to bring under control inflation as a mechanism, right? In using interest rates, and so far it hasn't worked. So everyone will remember that. I do want to play another clip, which is the debate that they actually had and some further exchanges where Rishi starts to talk about, interest rates, so on and so forth. And this is important because we're going to get into what's happened to bond yields. And I kind of explained it a little bit yesterday in the live that I did yesterday, but I explained it again today. And more importantly, in the pound. And then I guess it's going to be for you guys to judge from an economic point of view who's done the best job, and if we're heading into the right direction, I guess, is the biggest question of all. So let me just bring up this clip right here, and we can kick off from here.
It's going to push people into
please let Liz Truss answer. Please let her answer.
When inflation gets out of control, interest rates go up, that's what happens.
Please let Liz Truss answer.
I don't accept those points.
This is a really good debate, by the way, if you didn't watch it.
Well, look, we all took a decision to protect the economy and support the NHS through COVID. And of course, we all knew there was a bill that we needed to pay for that. So the question is, should we pay that bill ourselves, or do we put it on the country's credit card and pass the tab to our children and grandchildren to take care of? Now, I don't think that's right.
I would start paying it down in 3 years.
That's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here is kids, who are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Rishi, that is not true in countries like the US.
Now, if there is any instance where a politician kind of does what she said, she did kind of carry through with that promise. And we all know how it went in terms of the 45p tax cut didn't go down well. It meant that ultimately the markets were spooked. We were borrowing so much money without any fiscal plan between the balancing of it all. And I think as we move into my thoughts around what's happened to bond yields and the pound specifically over the last, well, she was in situ for what, 44 days or so. So within the last 58 days, we've come full circle in comparison to where we were just literally 30 days ago when all of this was kicking off with the markets. But it is worthwhile just listening to maybe some more of these remarks before I actually get into looking at the bond markets and actually looking at the pound as well.
Canada and Japan all have higher levels of debt than the UK. Hard-working taxpayers who do the right thing have seen their taxes rise, despite the fact that we promised in our manifesto not to do it.
Hang on, Faisal.
I think that is what is wrong.
You just mentioned 3 countries. Do you know what mortgage rates are in the US at the moment? Do you want to use them as an example? Their mortgage rates are almost 50% higher than mortgage rates in this country because they're borrowing so much.
I'm sorry, this
Canada.
is scaremongering.
Canada actually
this is
has
Project Fear.
Yes, there's been this conversation today, hasn't there? Involving
Right, okay, so look, that's the context of where we were. And what ensued after that was market panic. We all know the stories behind it. But let's actually have a look in terms of visuals, actual things that we can palpably prove that is demonstrable. Let's have a look at the impact that those policies that Liz Truss essentially came in with, what they had in real time on the bond market. Now, just looking at the date. So Liz Truss became Prime Minister on September the 6th of this year. Okay. She left office on October the 20th. Now, if I've mapped this correctly, just make sure I've got this correctly before I actually share this screen with you. There we go. So this right here is essentially the 30-year UK bond. So this is the yield curve. Now, September the 6th, this is September the, well, from September the 7th on here, okay? This is essentially what happened, right? So right here, we see this massive spike where the yield of this bond goes from where it is down here. What's that? 3.36 yield. We see it go from there all the way up to 4.91. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, whenever you're looking at bond yields, this isn't like a typical stock market return. Now, in a stock market return, this right here is good news because in the chart, you're seeing that the price is increasing. When you're looking at bond markets specifically, actually what you want is the opposite. When the bond markets are going up, it means the cost of borrowing. So how bonds typically work, let me just minimize this quickly for a second. Let's get this here. Let me just minimize this quickly for a second. Now, how the bond market works are the government basically issues bonds to borrow money from people. And in exchange for your money, what they basically say is, right, we're going to give you back your capital with a yield of, say, 4%. That 4% is the cost of the government actually borrowing money because they have to pay you back your capital plus that 4%. So when you start to see a bond yield increase, let me just get this back up so it's big again. So when you start seeing yields get up to this level right here, it essentially means that it's costing more money, it's costing the government more money to borrow that level of cash, which means it's more expensive, right? Now, this is what we basically saw. Now, the reason why we subsequently also saw the pound drop around about that same time. So this is, where are we right now? So this is September 22nd. So in this first one right here, we saw this increase on September 21st. This is the pound. September 22nd, literally the pound took a massive dump. So you're looking at £1 and 7 pence against the US dollar, which basically means that our money isn't as valuable as it used to be. Now, that's a really important equation, because when the pound is weak and we're importing things using the dollar, what that essentially means is that things become more expensive to import, which then feeds up and drives up inflation, which gets us into the cycle of increasing interest rates to be able to combat that. Now, clearly, what we ideally want is we want bond prices to be at these levels right here, because when the bond yield starts to reverse and fall, it basically means that the government can start to ask for money, and it's going to cost them less money to be able to acquire those funds in the first place. So this is what happened with the pound, and this is running all the way up until where is this? This is the 28th of October. Now, Rishi Sunak got into office on the 25th, right? So the 25th is around about is here. So 3.5% on the bond yield. So we've seen during that period of time a massive drop. I do have another one right here. So this is the day that Rishi. So this is October 20th. This is the day that she actually resigned. So a little bit of an increase in the yield, dropped considerably in the following days up until the 28th, which is today. Rishi got sworn in this week on the 25th, and we can see on the 25th. Well, that's the 26th right there. The 25th, we're looking at 3.6. So it's actually down quite significantly at this point in time. And this is the stuff that we actually want to see. Now, what does this mean in regards to the actual pound? Okay, so the pound versus the dollar. What's happened since then? Well, as we've already seen, after the budget announcement, the mini budget announcement, we saw the pound get down to £1.07 against the dollar. We've then seen it through various interventions, and this is where we start to see it start to recover. Now, interestingly, Jeremy Hunt started obviously dismantling the mini budget, and this is where we started to see it. But look at this right here. From the 20th, the day she resigned, the pound recovered quite a bit, 112. We're now looking at 115 at this point in time. So I think this is a really, really interesting look at, what's actually happened over the course of the last few days, really, and the last month and a half, and how important fiscal policy, fiscal plans within the government, and how important the markets are to our economy. And that's the reason why I've covered so much of the political spectrum over the past 2 to 3 weeks, because that has a material impact on the pound. It has a material impact on the bond market. During the time, I haven't even mentioned there, and you guys will probably remember, the Bank of England actually bought a load of bonds, £65 billion they were buying within that 2-week period to try and prop up the bond market, which had a direct impact on the pound as well. So, we are heading into a situation right now where it feels like we're in good stead right now. The pound has recovered quite a bit. What we're looking for right now is for that to continue to increase. There are challenges moving forward, and that is going to be, I guess, borne out in the budget in a couple of weeks, because we know that there are going to be spending cuts. There are going to have to be tax rises as well. But to what extent, we don't yet know. Paying attention to the news today, what we do know is that potentially there is going to be a windfall tax on the gas producers, oil producers. So BP, I think it was, and Shell are two that Rishi Sunak is basically looking at. But this kind of stuff is really, really important. And this is where I do want to encourage people, if you're watching the channel, politics may be a little divisive. It may be a little confusing, and it may be unappealing and certainly unpalatable. But I think understanding how all of these things interact with markets is fundamentally intrinsic to, especially if you're investing. It's intertwined, and it is best to understand how these things kind of relate, intertwine, and how they impact upon one another, so that you can make the best choices when it comes to your financial decisions as a whole. And so in this video, that's the analysis. That's the difference, really. Look, I think Rishi, fingers crossed. There's a lot of division and there's a lot of stuff going in the news right now. I filter a lot of this stuff out because what I'm interested in is he going to be making the best decisions that are going to impact the economy and are going to be best for the markets and market confidence so that we can start to bring things like, mortgage rates under control and we can start to really get ahead of inflation. That is much, much easier said than done. And I don't necessarily believe that inflation is going to be conquered by interest rate hikes alone. If anything, it hasn't worked so far. I don't see that it's going to work moving forward without some real radical thinking around our energy consumption and energy production. But those are just my thoughts. Anyway, there we go. I hope you enjoyed this. One way that you can help me is by smashing that like button. So we've got 14 on there at the moment. If we can increase that, that will be very, very helpful. But guys, let me know what you think in the comment section. I appreciate every single one of you. It is Friday evening. Have a good Friday evening. Have a good Saturday. I will see you probably next week if I don't do a live over the weekend. But guys, thank you. Catch you in a bit.